Now that we got the basics about events down, let's talk about event modifiers, which is another useful feature built into Vue. Here's an example for an event modifier that can sometimes be useful. Let's say you had a form HTML element, in there you had some input, and you had a button that says sign up, whatever. If you reload, you have that here. Now the problem you'll have by default, if you leave it like that, even if it's in the view controlled HTML part, is that when you click this button, this page will reload. And the reason for that is that the browser default for a form with a button like this is to submit that form and send a HTTP request to the server serving this app. In this case, we have no such server. We're running this locally, but still, the browser simply sends a request to our local machine, therefore, you could say. Now, of course, we have no code in place to handle this request. Now, we'll get there later in this course, but typically with frameworks like Vue, you want to prevent this browser default, and instead you want to handle this manually in JavaScript with help of Vue in your Vue app. And you want to read the user input there, validate it, and then send it manually to a backend server and store it in a database, for example. So you want to prevent that browser default of automatically sending it. Now there are two ways of doing that. One of them is cool, and the other one is, well, more obvious, I would say. You can listen to the submit event here, which again is a default browser event to which you can listen on form elements. Then we could have a method here, submit form, like this, at which we can point here, submit form. Now we're telling Vue that whenever the form is submitted, submit form should be executed. And here we could do whatever we want, for example, show an alert, submitted. Now, right now, the problem is that we still have the browser default. If I click this, I get the alert, but the page reloads thereafter. And when the page reloads, that means we'll lose all our data, right? If I had a counter here and I click sign up, you'll see that all the data is lost because of the page reload, the Vue app restarts, so to say. So we haven't solved the problem. But remember that we get this default event object. I talked about that in the last lecture. Now we can call prevent default on that. This is a default browser mechanism. It's built in JavaScript, which is totally independent from Vue. Even if we just used vanilla JavaScript on that default event object which we get, we could call prevent default. And this would tell the browser that the form should not be submitted, that we don't want that browser default. So now if I reload, I can change my counter, click sign up, we see the alert, and the counter still is there because now that browser default has been prevented. This works, and there's nothing wrong with it, but Vue has a nicer way for us. We can remove all that code and instead use a so-called event modifier. There are certain built-in modifiers which you can connect to events you're listening to, let's say, to change that event behavior. And you add such a modifier with a dot after the event name after vOn. So vOn colon, then the event name, and then a dot if you want a modifier. Now, there are only a couple of supported modifiers. You can find a full list in the official docs. For example, there is a prevent modifier. And this modifier, which is built into Vue, will prevent the browser default. So it will basically do what we did manually a second ago, just with less code. There also is a stop modifier for stopping propagation, but here we need the prevent modifier. And with that, if we reload, I can click sign up, we see that alert, and still the page doesn't reload thanks to this modifier. So that's nice to know, and that will come in handy later. We don't just have such event modifiers to change the event and browser behavior, we also have modifiers we can connect to events to change when the event occurs. And one example would be our buttons. Let's say for whatever reason, we only want to subtract 5 if the user right-clicks on the button. The default, of course, is to react to a left click. But if we wanted to react to a right click, we could add a modifier here as well. And we can set it to right. Alternative values are left, which you don't need to specify because it's the default, middle, and, well, right. And this tells Vue that here, you only want to react to a right click. So when you're using a mouse event like click, you can use the right, left, and middle event modifiers to change which mouse button triggers this event. So if we now save this, you see I can add 10 by clicking with the left key. But if I click on subtract 5 with the left key, nothing happens. If I use the right mouse button though, which you can tell I'm doing because my context menu opens up, now the counter gets smaller. Of course, we can argue whether that's useful here, but it's definitely useful to be aware of those modifiers. And there's a last kind of modifiers, and that would be key modifiers when you're listening to keyboard events, like here on the input element. Currently, we're updating the name upon the input event here, so on every keystroke. Now let's say we want to update the internally stored name, so this name property, with every keystroke, but the name that's being output here should only be updated when the user hits enter on this input element. Well, for that, we could have another data property, confirmed name, which is the actual name we want to output here. So here we got the confirmed name in this paragraph. And the confirmed name, unlike the internally stored name, which is just named name, the confirmed name should only update here when the user hits the enter button in this input field. For that, we can add another event listener on the input element. Yes, you can have more than one. So here we're listening to input with vOnInput. Now I'll add another vOn directive and also listen to the key up event, which is triggered when a key is pressed and released again. And here I want to trigger a method which I have yet to add, which I'll call confirm input or confirm name, whatever you want. The goal here in confirm input is to set this confirmed name, so this new data property we added, which we're outputting in this paragraph, set this confirmed name equal to the internally stored name, which we update with every keystroke. So here, vOn key up, I want to point at confirm input. Now currently, this would fire whenever any key is pressed and released. So currently, if I reload here, we would basically have the same behavior as before. With every keystroke, the input event, but then also the key up event is triggered, and therefore we basically confirm the input with every keystroke. So that's probably not the final behavior we want. Instead, we can use another modifier with a dot here to tell Vue that since this is a keyboard event, we only want to trigger this event upon certain special keys that are pressed and released. For example, the enter key. You could also listen to control or shift or page down. All keyboard keys are possible here, but I want to listen to the enter key. And with that, I'm saying, hey, when the enter key is pressed and released, then confirm input should be executed. So now if I save that and reload, I can enter Maximilian here, and we see nothing in that green box. But if I place my cursor in here and hit enter, now we see that output here. So these are event modifiers. Now I'm quickly going to auto-format this HTML code with the format document key combination here in Visual Studio Code to make this more readable, but it's the same code as before, just structured differently. So that's the input we just worked on. We have the input event and the key up event with the enter modifier to change when confirm input executes.